A big reason for the success of the Legendary Monsterverse is that there are people involved with the films like Mike Dougherty that are diehard fans of the original Godzilla universe. They don't want to see completely new takes on the genre like we got from TriStar with Godzilla in 1998. Instead, they want what many of us Godzilla fans have wanted for decades, to get a big budget, serious take on a modern kaiju, or in this case, Titan-filled Godzilla film series. It's easy to see that third and fourth films in the franchise, Godzilla King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong, are inspired by the Showa era's Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster and King Kong vs. Godzilla. I'm not saying that these are remakes of those films, they technically aren't, but the inspiration is there nonetheless. Knowing this, what are some other films from the Showa, Heisei, and Millennium eras that you'd like to see be the inspiration for upcoming Legendary Monsterverse films? With that question in mind, I've got 4 films from each of the Showa and Heisei eras, along with 2 more from the Millennium era that I'd like to see done in the Monsterverse style. So without further delay, let's take a look. First off, I'm going to exclude the original Godzilla or Gojira. It's not that this film has already been done. Godzilla 2014 is not a remake of the original film, nor do I believe it was trying to be. Yet 2014 did give us an entry into the franchise, taking the place of that movie. If you're looking for a Gojira remake in the modern era, I'd recommend Shin Godzilla. So to officially start the list, let's begin with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Now I know I'm a child of the Showa era, but I absolutely love the first incarnation of Mechagodzilla. While later versions of Mecha G were designed by mankind in defense of Godzilla, the original Metal G was created by aliens. To be honest, I think that bringing in any version of Mechagodzilla may seem a little out of place in the Monsterverse that we know of so far. Godzilla King of the Monsters hasn't come out yet at the time of writing this, but they've been teasing an alien origin for Ghidorah. If that's true, then this opens the door for other alien threats as well, allowing for a remake of the original Mecha G. I'm not gonna lie either, I'm a huge King Caesar fan and I'd love to see my favorite Guardian monster get the legendary makeover. Next up we have Godzilla vs. Megillah. This may be the movie I've seen the most from the franchise. I wore out so many VHS copies of this as a kid and even later on in life. Now I know this movie ranks pretty high on the Chizo meter as far as Showa movies went, but I'd love to see new takes on Gigan, Megalon, and even Jet Jaguar. Megalon was probably my least favorite of the 3, but I'd love to see what kind of insect-like variants on the kaiju they could come up with in a new version. As for Gigan, even Mike Dougherty wants to bring him into the Monsterverse. I'd love to see him in a more natural version without the cyborg add-ons at first. Then they could explain who upgraded and weaponized the Titan and why. This could be similar to his treatment in the novels from the Godzilla animated universe. If you haven't seen my video on Gigan from that book and you're a Gigan fan like me, make sure to check it out. I'll have a link to it at the end of the video. I'd also like to see how they would refresh Jet Jaguar. Would there just be one of them, or maybe even multiple ones that combine to make the larger form? The original Godzilla vs. Hetero, or Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, was definitely a strange entry into the franchise. Many of us call this the Godzilla on acid film, yet I think fans have started to enjoy it more as time goes by. Even if you're not a big fan of the 70s drug-styled hippie-inspired filming techniques, you have to admit that Hetero was an awesome kaiju addition to the Toho universe. I'd love to see what Legendary could do with a more modern version of the Smog Monster. I can imagine this one being from Earth instead of coming from outer space. There is plenty of pollution around today to lead to this Titan's creation. I'd love to see Hetero not only linked to pollution, but this time either to radiation or even the oxygen destroyer. A good bait and switch if they don't want to bring in Destoroyah at all, or just not yet. I also think this would be a good film to see either Mothra or Rodan help Godzilla, as I think Legendary would take Hetero's size up a few notches to bring the danger levels up. And lastly, from the Showa era, I can't leave out Destroy All Monsters. If the Legendary Monsterverse truly wants to be like the MCU, then they need a big event movie every now and then, like the Infinity Gauntlet. They don't have to look any further than Destroy All Monsters. The original film may have been lacking a bit, but the title and overall idea would be amazing on today's movie screen. Instead of an unfair fight with King Ghidorah facing off against all the other monsters, I could see this one with all the good Titans fighting Ghidorah again, but this time with allies like Gigan, Destoroyah, Megalon, Hetero, and others. Now at the time of writing this, King of the Monsters hadn't come out yet, but many of us are saying that Ghidorah is probably going to die in that film. Even so, there could always be another Ghidorah, or perhaps this time it's King Ghidorah, or better yet, Mechagodzilla. Or we could even get Des Ghidorah, or Kaiser Ghidorah. Okay, so enough of the Showa era, now let's take a look at what films give inspiration from the Heisei era. Another titan that Mike Dougherty said he'd like to see brought into the Legendary Universe besides Gigan is none other than Biollante. This needs to be made. The original film was great, but it lacked much needed CGI and special effects, and in my opinion, it was hindered by the cumbersome girl soul in the plant storyline. I'd love to see them take the girl out of the movie and just have be a rose or some other kind of plant crossed with Godzilla. This time we could see a much larger plant creature. She was easily able to harm Godzilla in the last film, yet she had very little defense against him, so making her city-sized or even bigger could be her strategy this time. I'd even like to see them have her create other smaller plant titans to help defend her, similar to the Servum from the Godzilla animated series, but only an idea, not in style or shape. This next one I put on the list is actually one of the titans or films that I thought would never get anywhere near the Legendary Universe. But the more I think about it, it was just the name of the kaiju that made me think that it wouldn't fit. What I'm talking about here is Space Godzilla. I'm sorry, I love the monster, but the name is a bit silly. That said, there is a lot of potential here. Perhaps when it's first encountered, it could be some new unrecognizable monster that fights Godzilla and somehow during the fight gets a sample of his DNA and uses it to upgrade itself. They could then have the Titan go into a hibernation-like sleep in a crystal-shaped hardened cocoon, hatching out later on, looking like an updated Space Godzilla. And speaking of those crystals, I'd love to see a new twist on the crystals that it builds around it. Like say that it needs a certain mineral to build these crystals, and that mineral is only in high enough quantities on Skull Island, leading to a confrontation with Kong. Or perhaps it's near where Mothra or Rodan are sleeping. It could even be possible that due to the hollow earth, the minerals needed are deep under the Earth's crust, and in building its base down there, all of the other titans living down there are forced out onto the surface to wreak havoc. There are 2 films left in the Heisei era, but the next one I'd like to look at is Godzilla and Mothra Battle for Earth. A lot of us have wondered if we're going to get any solo films like a Mothra solo movie or Rodan solo movie. And even though I would definitely watch either of those, there's a possibility that the studio would think that Mothra and or Rodan wouldn't be able to carry their own film. For that very reason, this could work as a mostly Mothra film, not unlike the Heisei version. I've become a huge fan of Batra in the last year or so I'd love to see the evil Mothra make its legendary entrance. And for my final entry of Heisei films that should inspire Legendary Monsterverse movies, of course I can't leave out Godzilla vs. Destoroyah. There have already been rumors of the oxygen destroyer being used in Godzilla King of the Monsters, along with Twitter pictures of that same device from Legendary Pictures as well. Now this doesn't mean that Destoroyah is coming, as many fans and YouTubers have pointed out, but to say that there is not enough tie between the oxygen destroyer and Destoroyah itself is like saying Batra isn't tied to Mothra. Sure, we can have Batra without Mothra, but it's not likely. That said, I'd love to see how evil a modern version of Destoroyah could look. Just imagine it getting the same treatment as Ghidorah did in King of the Monsters. And now here are my final 2 films of inspiration from the Millennium era. First up, I'd like to see a new version of Godzilla 2000. I'd love to see this movie get remade because Orga could definitely use a refresh. The effects for the alien craft could be much better nowadays, and Orga's suit was way too big, not allowing for any decent fight with Godzilla. CGI would allow for an amazing Orga with a fight that could rival those with Ghidorah. This time, I'd rather see Orga be its own creature as well, instead of trying to mimic the Big G, leaving that to Space Godzilla for the Legendary films. For my second film from this era, I actually have 2, but I'll explain why. The first one is GMK. I just say that because I love this film. It's one of my favorite Godzilla movies, and I'd absolutely love to see it redone in the Legendary Monsterverse style. That said, with the role reversal and having Godzilla be evil and Ghidorah being the good monster, I don't know if they'd be able to do this in the Legendary universe without a lot of explanation, which is why that original film was more standalone. So if that couldn't be done, then I'd go with a modern take on Tokyo s.o.s. Even if the Monsterverse never goes in the direction of a mech titan such as Mechagodzilla, then it could just be replaced with a mentally controlled Kong or even Gigan. I'm sure Mothra could find a way to object to that. So what do you guys think of the films on my list here that I think should inspire future films in the Legendary Monsterverse? What movies would you like to see remade in a modern style? I'd love to hear your comments and suggestions down below.